costumes. You're going to either copy these notes down in your technical journal or a Google Doc that's been provided for you. Oops. First, let's talk about what a costume is. It is any outfit worn by an actor in a production. The costume includes any kind of accessory. And the costume crew are the people that prepare the costumes for the play. These people usually sew, hand sew, or use a sewing machine. Let's talk about the importance of costumes. I really like costumes. I think they are the essential piece of an act for an actor to actually become the true character. So we see that costumes help the audience see the character, and they help reveal age, their personality, what their taste is like in clothing, in their personality, and the social standings, as well as their occupation of who they are. Second, costumes complete the visual impression of time and place. So it lets the audience know where we are and what time period we're in. It pretty much establishes things, through the scenery. It helps make the set come alive. Costumes also help the actors feel and move as the character rather than themselves. I've heard a lot of actors say, I don't really feel like my character until I put that costume on. And what does a costume designer do? A costume designer confers with the director. Meaning that they are going to first research the period of the play. They're going to create all the designs for the costume of the entire play. And then the director and the costume designer are going to sit down and collaborate and make sure that the director's vision comes alive. Designs are then taken to a costumer who transforms them into the costumes. So the costume designer doesn't necessarily have to have costume sewing abilities. Most of them do, though. They understand the concept and understand how to sew. They might not be excellent at it, and that's why they have costumers to help them out. So what are some of the costume requirements? This is one of my favorite pictures. Costumes must be appropriate to the size of the stage. So if you had this costume right here, do you think this would be appropriate for a small theater or a large theater? So what do you think? Hopefully you answered that it would be for a large theater because it's so bold and brash. So smaller theaters, smaller costumes, larger theaters, costumes are going to be exaggerated. And if you guessed that this costume was from Wicked, you win the prize today. Other costume requirements. One, they have to reflect the mood and the style of the production. I'll let you see if you can guess which one this is too. So costumes we're going to talk about the color and the weight of the fabric. So if we're doing a comedy, we're going to have real bright colors and we're going to use lightweight fabric. For more serious and tragic plays, we like to use more subdued colors and more heavier fabric. So subdued colors would be like your darker greens and your blues and your browns and grays, black, that kind of stuff. And the fabric would be much heavier. A fantasy production is going to be what we call stylized. Basically, it could be anything that relates to what that fantasy is about. And finally, period plays, they are going to conform to the fashion, line, and material used in that particular time period. One of the things that I really like to focus on as a costume designer is that if the time period happens in the 1910s, I'm going to follow that timeline. Usually we want to stick with that period piece so that the audience gets a real feel for what it was like during that time period. And the costumes help with that. If you guessed that this was Beauty and the Beast, and that's Gaston, you were correct. And here's another one. Costumes unify the whole entire production. So look at this picture of Wicked. If you haven't seen this show, you have to. It has one of the most unique stylized costumes that I've ever seen in my entire life, and so unique. So let's look at the picture here, and we see that each of these costumes are different, but yet at the same time, the line of the skirts or the bodice part might be a little bit similar. But even though they might be different, the line of the skirts or the ruffles might be skewed on an angle. It makes the entire production unified, though, and that's the beautiful part. And it's also as different greens that we have going on here, and so it's so unique. But that's one of the things that costumes do. The last requirement, which some actors complain about often, is that costumes should be acceptable to the actor who wears them. Sometimes it doesn't always go the actor's way, and they're like, I don't like this costume, but you have to understand that the director has a vision. And so they have to kind of go with what the director is talking about. So first, though, the costume should fit the actor. It really should. It should fit their body type and their movability. Costumes should be allowed for required movement. And I stress required because whatever the actor is required to do is what the costume should be allowed to do. Oh, and if you guessed that was Beauty and the Beast as well, you're correct. And that's Lumiere. And the cool part about his costume here, just to make a note, is that the actor actually had the ability to turn the lights on and off with his hand. And there's some really cool effects in the play with that. So that's kind of a neat effect. Let's talk about design. Costume design is has 4 areas to consider when you're designing a costume. One is what we call line or silhouette. And this is based on the female. It's always been based on a female version. So the line of the dress or the silhouette of the dress on the female dictates the time period for the play. Okay. The second is the color. And this helps set the mood of what is happening in the play. The color that is on a particular actor also gives away sort of the protagonist, antagonist aspect of the play as well. We'll talk about these 4 costumes in just a second. Decoration is important. Decoration can tell us status, and the fabric used can tell us a lot about who the character actually is. So the 4 sketches that are down here, we have 4 different sketches, and you're going to kind of notice that each of them is going to have a different status. You'll kind of notice we'll start with the king, who is the one with the burgundy. And you'll notice that he right here has, he's got trim. The color is like a purple burgundy. And we can kind of dictate from that he is that king. He has power. And so that color kind of dictates that. This is, medieval, late medieval, almost Renaissance, not quite getting into there due to the line of this. We'll notice this girl here, her red sleeves kind of give it away that she is probably part of that antagonist. We have a hero here who is our Robin Hood figure who looks like this. He's got this bow and arrow. He might be our huntsman. And so his clothing kind of dictates, his status and maybe where he falls. Our heroine, we can tell by the yellow and the drop of her waist that she is probably part of this court here. But usually this yellow, or unless it is a gold, she could be his wife, which is totally possible. But there's obviously conflict going on. So we can definitely tell those things. More things about costume decorations. Decorations for costumes include trim, such as buttons or lace, accessories, hats, shoes, gloves, fans, or canes. And those things actually become really important because they kind of round out what the costume is all about. Jewelry, super important, especially for our female characters. It tells us status, if you have money, if you don't have money, that kind of stuff. Okay, let's talk about sources. Where do we find our costumes? There's 4 ways we find costumes. One is we can rent them. Renting can be kind of expensive. It can also be they might not fit properly, but it is quick. If you're under a time restraint, renting is a great option. We can borrow. Begging and borrowing, I always believe in. Borrowing, you have to keep track of those items, who they came from. A lot of times you can alter as long as you take things back out again before you return them. But borrowing is free. As long as you say thank you on the way out. I always send thank you notes to people I borrow from. Buying is a great option if you have the money, provided you have money, because one thing buying does is it increases your stock of what you have. So you see, like here, this is that costume shop in the back, and so they've got a lot of stuff in stock, which is fantastic. You can draw from over and over again, but you do have to have the money to do that. And the last is make. Making is perfect for the actor because we know it's going to fit the actor to the T. However, you have to have money to buy fabric. Fabric can be pretty expensive. 2, you have to have skill. And 3, you have to have time. So all of these have pros and cons. And a lot of times it just depends on the director and the costume designer as to who can get what. So when should costumes be completed? Costumes should be completed at least 1 week before the performance. I like to give a week to 2 weeks, actually sometimes, to try things on. And that's real important. We usually try to have a costume parade where we'll put everybody in the costumes and bring them out in front of the lights, because the director would like to see all the costumes in front of the lights before they give approval. Sometimes putting lights on certain colors changes things completely. So it's real important to do that kind of costume parade. So during rehearsal performances, the costume crew does several things. They always press all those costumes. They're going to make sure that, they're ready to go. And for all the actors, they help the actors dress. Sometimes they have to do it on the fly in the back. Sometimes they have to do those costume changes. They might need to make emergency repairs. I remember one time in college, we were doing the misanthrope, and that is 17th century French. So big, huge costumes. And one of the girls stepped on her dress and ripped it. And so she was lucky to have been able to exit the stage for a period of time. And I had to be there whipping up the costume. So always, you got to make emergency repairs if things like that happen. They also maintain clean dressing rooms. Very important to keep those dressing rooms clean. We want to keep sanitation clean, no germs, that kind of stuff. And, we want to make sure that our actors have a good space. So I have some videos for you to watch, and you can click on all of these and watch them. Very fascinating stuff. There's Greg Barnes reveals about different costumes of ways of getting them. This is a great introduction of costume designing. Wicked costumes about beading, totally fascinating. And just working in the theater as a costume designer. So I encourage you to watch all these videos just to grab a sense of what costume designing is all about.